The Community Arts Center buzzed softly in the late afternoon, filled with the kind of gentle noise that comes from people setting up for something important. Chairs scraped lightly across the wooden floor. Students whispered to one another as they unpacked sheet music, and teachers hurried around carrying clipboards, tuning violins, or fixing last-minute details. The center always felt warm and inviting, but today it carried a heavier sense of preparation, as if the walls themselves knew a big event was coming. The annual recital was only a week away, and everyone wanted things to be perfect. Among the people quietly working in the background was a woman named Lena, though most people simply called her the receptionist or the helper, depending on what task she was doing that day. She didn't mind that no one really knew her well. She had been volunteering at the center for almost a year, helping out wherever they needed an extra hand. If someone needed programs folded, she did that. If someone else needed someone to check off names on the attendance sheet, she did that too. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking. She preferred to blend in, to do the small things that kept the place running. She had a gentle way of moving, quiet and calm, as though she didn't want to disturb the air around her. Whenever she walked past the main rehearsal room, she slowed. Down a little, not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for her to catch a glimpse of the piano sitting in the corner. It was an older instrument, polished so many times that the wood seemed to glow. Most people saw a regular piano. For her, it meant something more, something she never explained, and hoped no one would ask about. The teachers talked loudly among themselves as they got everyone organized. They were skilled musicians, dedicated and hardworking, but today they were struggling. One of the advanced pieces the students needed to perform was giving everyone trouble. The timing was complicated, the rhythm unpredictable, and the teachers were growing frustrated. One teacher muttered under her breath about how impossible the piece was, while another tried to show her students how to handle the difficult section. From the corner of the room, the students watched their teachers fumble with the passage. They tried not to look worried, but it was clear that they were losing confidence. If their own instructors couldn't demonstrate it cleanly, how were they supposed to perform it on stage in front of parents, guests, and judges? The recital wasn't a competition, but people still took it seriously. They wanted to make their families proud. While all of this happened, Lena continued placing chairs in rows. She had done this task so many times she could practically do it with her eyes closed. She wasn't thinking about the chairs at all. She was thinking about the music drifting through the hallway. The melody was familiar, almost painfully so. She knew the piece the teachers were struggling with. She knew its twists, its demands, its emotional weight, because she had played it long ago, when her life was very different. But she kept her eyes down and stayed busy. There was no reason for anyone to know this. No reason for her to step forward. She had lived long enough to know that staying hidden sometimes brought peace. After a few minutes, one of the teachers decided to take another attempt at the challenging section. She straightened her back, cracked her knuckles dramatically, and sat at the piano like a warrior preparing for battle. The students giggled nervously. The teacher laughed too, but it was an uneasy laugh that revealed how uncertain she truly felt. She started playing again. The intro went fine. But when the difficult part arrived, her fingers hesitated for a split second. That was all it took for the flow to break. She sighed and tried again, but the piece refused to cooperate. After the fourth attempt, she stood up quickly from the bench, embarrassed and annoyed. "This piece is ridiculous," she muttered, rubbing her forehead. "Who even writes music like this?" Another teacher joked, "Maybe we should just ask someone off the street to play it. They might do better than us." Their laughter was light, but it had the edge of frustration. At that exact moment, Lena walked past the doorway with a stack of freshly printed attendance sheets. She didn't think anyone would notice her. Usually they didn't, but today, Annoyed teacher spotted her. "You there, do you play piano?" She called out, half joking, half desperate. The students snickered quietly. The teacher wasn't trying to be mean, but the way she said it made it sound as though she expected Lena to panic and run away. To them, Lena was simply the quiet woman who handled sign-in sheets and fetched extra chairs. She didn't dress like someone who played piano. She didn't have the air of a musician. She looked like someone who worked in an office. Someone polite and neat and very ordinary. Lena froze, surprised to be addressed so suddenly. She held the papers close to her chest and gave a soft smile. "Oh, I just help around here," she said gently. Not really? Come on, it'll be fun." The teacher interrupted, waving her over. "We're just trying to show the students that even adults struggle with hard things. Sit down and try this section for us." The students leaned forward, eager for entertainment. They expected her to say no. People often assumed that someone like her, someone who looked so simple and quiet, couldn't possibly play something complicated. Another teacher added, "We're not expecting anything serious. Just give it a try so they can see it's not easy." Their tone wasn't cruel, but it carried a hint of amusement, like they were inviting her into a harmless joke. Lena felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't embarrassed about the piano. They had no idea she could play, but she didn't like being put in the spotlight. Her life was built around avoiding attention. She liked being the helper, the one in the background, the one people forgot about. But something else tugged at her. A small, quiet part of her that she tried to silence every day. A part that remembered music not as something painful, but as something beautiful. Something that used to fill her world completely. She didn't know what made her agree. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was nostalgia. Or maybe she simply didn't want to disappoint the hopeful faces staring at her. "All right," she said softly. "I can try." The room fell quieter than anyone expected. Even the students stopped whispering. They didn't think she would say yes. One of the teachers moved aside so she could sit at the piano. Lena walked toward the instrument slowly, as if approaching an old friend she hadn't seen in years. She placed the attendance sheets on a nearby chair and wiped her palms on her skirt. When she sat down, the bench creaked slightly under her. She swallowed, feeling a strange mix of nerves and familiarity. She hadn't touched a piano in a long time. Not because she couldn't, but because life had pushed her away from it. She pushed back her memories, like someone closing a drawer, then placed her fingers gently on the keys. Her touch was soft at first, almost hesitant. The teachers exchanged amused glances, thinking she would tap at the keys awkwardly and laugh. "It off. Try this section," one teacher said, pointing at a page of sheet music. "It's the hardest part." Lena didn't even need to read the notes. She already knew them, but she pretended to look because she didn't want to draw suspicion. As she let her eyes scan the paper, her heart beat faster. Her breathing slowed. The world around her, the students, the teachers, the chatter, the chairs, began to fade away. The only thing that existed was the piano in front of her. For years, she had avoided moments like this. Moments when music could pull her back into who she used to be. But sitting there, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips, she realized how much she had missed it. Music had once been her entire life. A part of her heart she had sealed away so tightly that no one, not even herself, had been allowed to touch it. The teachers waited, expecting a clumsy attempt. The students watched, expecting to giggle at mistakes. Nobody expected what was about to happen. Lena took a slow breath, letting it fill her lungs. Her fingers curved naturally, like they remembered the shape of the keys, even if she hadn't practiced in years. She pressed the first note lightly, testing the weight of the piano. Then another, and another. The sound was soft but steady. Everyone leaned in, unsure what to make of it. She lifted her hands slightly, preparing to begin the difficult passage they had asked for. Her heartbeat steadied, her shoulders relaxed. A calm washed over her, the kind she hadn't felt in years. In that moment, she wasn't the quiet helper anymore. She wasn't the woman who folded programs or carried boxes or blended into the background. She was the person she used to be. And though the teachers didn't know it yet, though the students couldn't guess it, the next few seconds would change the entire room, because the moment she pressed the first real note, everything would shift. Everything. The room seemed to pause right before she began, as if the air itself was holding still to see what would happen. Lena's fingers hovered above the keys, and for a moment she simply breathed in quietly, letting her nerves melt away. She had played this piece long ago, but the memory of it lived deep inside her hands, as if the notes were etched into her skin. When she pressed the first set of notes, the sound came out clean and gentle, like the soft start of a story that was only beginning to unfold. The teachers expected her to stumble right away. The students leaned forward, waiting for the awkward mistakes they were sure would come. No one in the room was prepared for what followed. Instead of struggling, her hands moved with a smoothness that felt almost unreal to everyone watching. Her fingers glided from one key to the next, landing exactly where they needed to be. The rhythm began to build, the melody growing fuller and deeper with each second. There was no hesitation. Number. Confusion. No second guessing. She played as if she had practiced the piece that very morning, though she hadn't touched a piano in years. The teachers exchanged confused glances. One of them blinked several times, unsure if they were imagining it. The students looked at each other silently, their eyes wide. No one laughed. No one whispered. They stared at this quiet woman who they thought barely knew anything about music, now performing one of the most difficult sections of the piece with ease they didn't expect even from their own instructors. The section grew more complex as she continued. The notes came faster, twisting around each other like rushing water in a narrow stream. Yet her hands kept up effortlessly, moving with confidence and control. With each phrase she played, the room grew more still. Even the teachers who had spent years practicing and teaching music felt a strange mix of awe and disbelief. One teacher stepped closer, as if proximity might help her understand what she was witnessing. Was this really the same woman who spent most days checking off attendance lists and setting up classrooms? The same woman who always smiled politely, but never pushed herself into the spotlight? They had all assumed she was just a kind helper with no particular talents beyond being organized and helpful. But now, watching her play, they realized she had been hiding something extraordinary. Lena wasn't thinking about the people watching her. She wasn't thinking about the teachers who doubted her or the students who expected her to fail. She wasn't thinking about anything except the music. For the first time in a long while, the world faded away, leaving only the sound of the piano beneath her hands. She didn't play the piece like someone demonstrating it for others. She played it like someone who had lived inside the music, someone who understood every rise and fall, every delicate moment, and every thunderous burst of emotion. Her touch was gentle where it needed softness, powerful where it required strength. She shaped the sound with sensitivity, almost like she was breathing life into it. Halfway through the passage, she closed her eyes, not to show off, but because she didn't need to see the keys. Her body remembered what her mind had tried so hard to forget. The teachers were frozen in place. One of them pressed a hand to her mouth, stunned. Another slowly lowered the sheet music she had been holding, realizing she no longer needed it. The students forgot about their nervous chatter. They listened quietly, their expressions softening into something like admiration. As the end of the section approached, Lena let the final notes linger in the air longer than necessary, giving the sound a bittersweet finish. She lifted her hands gently, letting them hover for a moment before she rested them in her lap. Silence filled the room. It was the kind of silence that comes after something unexpected and remarkable, heavy, stunned, and almost sacred. Everyone stared at her, unsure what to say or how to break the stillness. Lena looked up slowly, uncertain of their reactions. She hadn't meant to show skill. She simply didn't know how to play halfway. When she played with her whole heart. It was the only way she knew. I hope that was all right, she said softly. Her voice was calm, but inside, she felt a sudden return of awareness. Her heart fluttered nervously, worried she had revealed too much. One of the teachers stepped closer, still too shocked to hide it. You played that as if you've known it your whole life, she said. Quietly, Lena's cheeks warmed. She tried to give a small smile, unsure how to respond. Another teacher walked around the piano and looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. You're not just someone who helps around here, are you? She whispered more. To herself and to anyone else. The students finally found their voices. How did you do that? One asked. That was incredible. Another said, Can you play more? Lena shook her head gently, trying to dismiss the attention. I just remember a little, she said. It's nothing special. But her words didn't convince anyone. They had watched her hands. They had heard the music. They knew without question that what she had done was far beyond a simple memory. The teacher who had first asked her to try the piece looked embarrassed. She approached with a shimmer of guilt in her eyes. We didn't mean to put you on the spot, she said. We were just frustrated, and we didn't expect. She paused, realizing the insult hidden inside her assumption. We didn't expect you to be able to play that well. Lena nodded, understanding the apology behind the words. She didn't take offense. She was used to people underestimating her. In fact, she preferred it most of the time. It made it easier to stay invisible. But today, for some reason, the invisible part of her life suddenly felt fragile, like it was beginning to crack. The teacher walked around the piano bench and sat beside her. Where did you learn to play? Like that? She asked gently. Have you taken classes here before? Or somewhere else? Lena hesitated. She hadn't spoken about her past in years. Not because it was dangerous or secret, but because it hurt. Music had once been everything to her. It had filled her days, shaped her friendships, even guided her future. She had lived inside practice rooms, surrounded by sheet music and the scent of polished wood. She had played in small halls, large rooms, rehearsals, lessons, and auditions. But then life had changed, and the music she once loved became a reminder of things she had lost. I used to play, she said softly. A long time ago. One teacher leaned forward. Used to? You play better than most professionals I've seen. Lena shook her head. I'm out of practice. The room fell quiet again, not because of awkwardness, but because the teachers sensed they were brushing against something, delicate something she wasn't ready to share. One student raised a hand timidly. Can you show us the beginning of the piece too? He asked. Lena looked down at her hands. She felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that came whenever she got too close to music. The ache wasn't pain exactly. It was more like longing, mixed with fear. I don't want to take over your rehearsal, she said. You have your own work to do. But we want to learn from you, a girl said softly. You played with feeling. That's what our teacher keeps telling us to do. Lena looked at the girl. Her eyes were hopeful, not demanding, not pushing, just open. One of the teachers nodded. If you're willing, you can help us show them how to shape the melody. Only if you're comfortable. Comfortable. The word echoed strangely in Lena's mind. She wasn't sure she was comfortable. She wasn't sure she wanted to step back into a world she had walked away from. She had promised herself never to return to it, because the memories tied to it were too heavy. But something warmed her heart when she looked into the student's eyes. Something soft and familiar. Something she thought had disappeared from her. Life. She felt the weight of the room waiting for her response. Not with pressure, but with quiet respect. Finally, she nodded. "I can show you a little." The room brightened instantly. The students straightened in their seats. The teachers smiled with gratitude and relief. And Lena, despite her nerves, felt a tiny spark inside her, something gentle and alive, something she hadn't felt in years. She turned back to the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and prepared to play again. But this time, she wasn't hiding. She was beginning to return. When Lena placed her fingers on the keys again, the room shifted into a quiet focus that felt different from the first time she played. Before, everyone had been surprised. Now they were quietly waiting, almost nervous, as if they were afraid they might miss something important. The students sat straighter. The teachers leaned in without meaning to. Even the sunlight drifting through the windows seemed softer, as if the world itself was listening. Lena took a small breath, steady and calm. She wasn't showing off. She didn't like attention, and she definitely didn't want anyone staring at her. But something about the students' eagerness touched her. She remembered being their age, sitting in lessons, staring at older musicians, with wide eyes, hoping she could someday understand the secrets hidden inside their hands. She remembered the excitement, the nervousness, the hope. It all came back to her in a warm wave. She began to play the opening of the piece, slower than the original tempo, so the students could follow it. Her hands moved with the same grace as before, but this time she shaped the notes gently, explaining things as she played. "You don't need to rush through it," she said softly. "The beginning is like telling a story. Let the melody breathe." Her voice blended with the sound of the piano, giving the moment a calming, almost tender feel. The students listened intently. Some of them nodded, as if the music suddenly made sense. One teacher whispered, "Listen to how she shapes every phrase." But she spoke so quietly, it was clear she wasn't talking to anyone else. She was just reacting to what she was hearing. Lena continued playing, stopping at certain measures to explain how the hands should move or where the emotion should rise. She wasn't lecturing. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She simply spoke the way people speak when they love something deeply and want others to understand that love. One student raised a hand. "How do you make the soft parts sound so clear?" he asked. Lena smiled gently. "Soft doesn't mean weak," she said. "Think of it like whispering a secret. Even when you whisper, people can hear you if you speak with intention." The students exchanged looks. They had never heard the piece described like that. She placed her fingers back on the keys and played the soft passage again, this time even more delicately. The notes floated through the air like small pieces of glass, catching light. The boy who asked the question stared at her hands, mesmerized. "I didn't know it could sound like that," he said quietly. Lena's response was simple. "Music changes when you trust it." Her words hung in the air, and several students seemed to absorb them deeply. The teachers, too, looked thoughtful, almost humbled. For years, they had tried to teach technique, posture, timing, and discipline. They focused on right notes, correct rhythm, structured learning. But they rarely spoke about trust. They rarely spoke about the heart behind the music. Listening to Lena, they realized they had forgotten something important, something that couldn't be learned from a textbook or a lesson plan. Lena continued working with them for a while, gently guiding their hands when needed, demonstrating difficult runs and explaining how certain parts needed more breath while others needed firmness. Her voice stayed soft, but there was strength behind it. She didn't sound like someone unsure of herself. She sounded like someone who had lived inside the world of music long enough to know it intimately. The students followed her instructions eagerly. Some copied her hand positions. Others studied her face, trying to understand how much emotion she placed into the music. They treated her with respect, genuine respect, the kind reserved for someone who clearly knew what she was doing. The teachers watched with mixed emotions. They felt grateful for her help, impressed by her skill, but also embarrassed that they had never realized who she really was. They had worked beside her for almost a year and never asked about her past. They had assumed she was simply there to help, nothing more, nothing less. Yet seeing her now, seated at the piano with the confidence of someone who belonged there, they realized how wrong they had been. After about half an hour of guiding the students, Lena slowed down and finally let her hands rest on her lap. She gave a small smile. "I think that's enough for now," she said gently. The students groaned softly in disappointment. They weren't ready for it to end. One girl even raised her hand quickly. "Can you stay for the rest of the rehearsal?" she asked hopefully. Lena opened her mouth to respond, but before she could answer, one of the teachers stepped in. "Let's not overwhelm her," the teacher said kindly. "She's already helped us more than we could ask." Lena nodded, grateful for the support. She didn't want to disappoint the students, but she also didn't want to be pushed too far too fast. The piano still stirred old emotions inside her, both the joyful ones and the painful ones. The more she played, the more she felt memories trying to rise to the surface, memories she had kept buried for a long time. She stood up slowly from the bench. "I can help a little more later," she said softly, offering the students a reassuring smile. Their faces brightened immediately. The teachers approached her, their tone different from earlier, gentler, more careful. One teacher spoke first. "You're incredible," she said, still sounding awestruck. "I don't know how you kept something like this to yourself." Lena shook her head. "I didn't mean to hide it," she said quietly. "I just don't play much anymore." "Why?" another teacher asked before she could stop herself. Lena paused. Her eyes softened, but the softness carried something heavy beneath it, something that made the teachers regret asking. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, as if searching for the right words in the lines of her palms. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Life got in the way. The simplicity of her answer struck the teachers deeply. They didn't push further. They could feel that behind those 5 words lived years of experience, change, maybe even sorrow. They didn't want to force her to revisit something painful. A calm silence filled the room for a moment. It wasn't awkward. It felt respectful, like everyone understood they had stepped close to something fragile. The teacher nearest to her put a hand on her shoulder gently. "Well, whenever you're willing to help, we'd be honored to have you," she said. "Truly." Lena nodded kindly. She appreciated the warmth in their voices, but she didn't want praise. She didn't want admiration. She didn't want to be the center of attention. She just wanted to help quietly, without anyone making a big deal about it. She picked up the attendance sheets she had left on the chair and started walking toward the hallway. But before she could leave, one young student hurried up to her. He held his sheet music awkwardly, gripping the edges as if they might slip from his hands. "Can I ask something?" he said quietly. Lena turned to him with a gentle smile. "Of course." He hesitated, then pointed to a complicated measure on his music. "When I try to play this part, it doesn't sound right. It always feels messy. How do you make it? Sound smooth?" Lena looked at the measure, then at him. "Show me how you play it." He carried his sheet music to the piano and sat down nervously. He played the section slowly, stumbling through the turns and struggling to control the transitions. When he finished, he sighed. See? It sounds wrong. Lena sat beside him, but didn't touch the keys yet. It's not wrong, she said. You're thinking too much about getting it perfect. But I'm supposed to play it correctly at the recital, he said, frustrated. I know, she replied kindly. But perfect and correct are not the same. He frowned in confusion. She pointed at his hands. Right now, your fingers are trying to follow the notes, but they're scared. They're tense. They don't trust you yet. Trust me? He repeated. Yes, she said. You have to make your hands feel safe. Let them move freely. He stared at her, unsure how to respond. She placed her hands on the keys and played the section slowly, letting the notes flow easily. Then she played it again, this time without looking at the keys. Your hands need to feel like they're speaking, not obeying commands, she said. He nodded, thinking hard. Try again, she encouraged. He placed his hands back on the keys. But before he played, she added softly, Don't force it. Let it happen. He tried the section again, and though he still stumbled, something was different. His touch was lighter. The tension in his fingers softened out. Lena smiled. See? It's better. He looked surprised. It is. You just need practice, she said gently, and patience. One day, your hands will trust you completely. The boy looked down, absorbing her words. Then he whispered, Thank you. Lena gave him a warm nod before standing up again. She looked around the room one last time. The students watched her with admiration. The teachers watched with respect. She quietly stepped out into the hallway. As she walked through the familiar corridors of the Arts Center, she felt something stirring inside her, something she thought had disappeared forever. The music she played, the way the students listened, the surprise in the teacher's eyes. All of it awakened a part of her she had buried. A part she wasn't sure she was ready to face, but she could no longer ignore that something inside her had changed, and deep down, she knew, this was only the beginning. The hall felt strangely quieter the next morning, as if the walls themselves were holding on to the memory of the night before. The woman woke earlier than usual, still thinking about the teachers' faces when she played. She didn't expect anything to come from it, but something inside her felt lighter, as if a heavy stone she had been carrying for years had finally been set down. She made herself a simple breakfast and sat by the small window in her rented room. Outside, the sun touched the tops of the trees, and people walked by carrying bags, instruments, and paper. Students rushing toward the academy. She watched them for a moment and wondered if they saw the world differently, or if they felt the same pressure she once did. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. She hesitated, then opened it. Standing there was one of the youngest teachers from the academy, a man with tired eyes but a sincere expression. He introduced himself politely and explained that the head instructor wanted to see her again. The woman almost refused. She didn't want any trouble. She didn't want anyone looking too closely into her past or asking questions she would rather avoid. But the teacher's voice was gentle. He assured her that nothing bad would happen, and he even apologized for forcing her to play the day before. His sincerity touched her, and she finally agreed to come. As she walked beside him toward the academy, she felt a strange mix of nerves and calm. The path was lined with trees, whose leaves rustled softly in the morning breeze. Birds hopped along the fences, and voices echoed from nearby windows. Everything felt normal, yet not normal at all. When they reached the academy, she expected to be led through the side entrance like yesterday. Instead, he guided her through the main doors. Wide hallways, polished floors, students carrying sheet music, and soft piano notes drifting from open practice rooms. Every sound and sight reminded her of a world she had tried to forget. Her heart tightened, but she kept walking. They stopped. Outside a large classroom. The young teacher knocked lightly and opened the door. Inside, several instructors were seated around a long table, along with the head instructor. Papers and notebooks lay in front of them, but they were not discussing lessons as she expected. They were waiting for her. The head instructor stood up immediately. He wasn't harsh like the day before. His voice carried respect this time. He invited her to sit, but she shook her head, preferring to remain standing. She felt safer then. He began by telling her that the academy staff had talked long into the evening about what happened. They were impressed, shocked, humbled. Some even felt embarrassed, knowing they had doubted her so openly. The woman listened quietly, unsure what to say. Then came the unexpected part. The academy wanted her to help them not as a student, not as a competitor, but as a mentor. They explained that different students struggled with confidence, fear, or emotional connection to the instrument. The teachers believed she had something rare, a way of playing that came from real life, not training or rules. They wanted her to share that with some of the students. The woman froze. She looked around the room and saw nothing but hopeful faces. But she shook her head slowly. She wasn't a teacher. She wasn't trained or qualified. She didn't even consider herself part of this world anymore. But the teachers insisted. They didn't want perfection. They wanted heart. They wanted someone who understood music not as something to show off, but as something alive. The woman still hesitated. She had spent years working simple jobs, staying away from anything that reminded her of the stage or the pressure she once felt. But the academy's request was kind, genuine, even healing. Before she could respond, the head instructor asked her a question. Why did you stop playing? Her breath caught. She wished he had not asked that. Her fingers curled slightly as memories she had locked away began to surface. There had been a time when music consumed her days. She trained from early morning to late night, chasing goals set by others, not herself. Her talent brought praise, but also competition, stress, and expectations she couldn't meet. One day, everything collapsed. Her body and heart refused to continue. She walked away, and she had promised herself she would never go back. She tried to explain this simply, without going into details. The instructors listened with deep understanding. No one pushed her further. After a long silence, the head instructor spoke again. He told her she didn't have to decide immediately. She could take a day, a week, even longer. The academy doors would remain open if she ever wanted to return. The woman nodded gratefully. She thanked them for their kindness and stepped outside the room, needing fresh air. The hallway felt wider this time. Students continued running between classes, laughing, carrying heavy backpacks. A piano melody drifted from a nearby practice. Room soft, unsure, but honest. She found herself walking toward the sound. Inside the small room, a student sat at the piano, struggling with a passage. She hesitated before softly knocking on the doorframe. The student turned, surprised to see her. He recognized her immediately. Everyone had been talking about the mysterious woman who played last night. He greeted her shyly. She asked if she could sit for a moment. The student nodded. She listened as he played again. His hands shook, and he kept apologizing for mistakes. She smiled gently and told him mistakes were natural. She asked him to close his eyes and try once more not to play for the teachers, not for the exam, but for himself. He tried again. The difference was small but noticeable. His shoulders relaxed, and the notes flowed with a little more warmth. She didn't instruct him technically. She simply encouraged him to feel the music. After a few minutes, he smiled for the first time since she walked in. Something warm stirred in her chest. After leaving the practice room, She stepped outside the academy doors and breathed deeply. The sky was bright, the wind carried a gentle chill, and people moved around her with the rhythm of a normal day, but she didn't feel like the same person she was yesterday. That night, back in her small room, she sat on the edge of the bed thinking about the student's shy smile, the teacher's sincerity, and the way the music had felt when she played yesterday, not heavy, not demanding, but free. She realized she didn't fear the piano anymore. She feared the pressure that used to surround it. But things were different now. No one was asking her to perform on a stage or compete. They wanted her to guide others gently and honestly. For the first time in years, she considered saying yes. She lay down, closed her eyes, and felt a quiet calm settle inside her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she wasn't afraid of it. The piano that once felt like a burden was beginning to feel like a friend again. And deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning of something new. The morning light slipped gently through the thin curtains of her small room, touching the floor like soft steps. The woman sat quietly at the edge of her bed, her hands resting on her lap. She had barely slept. Her mind kept drifting back to the academy, to the teacher's request, and to the young student she had helped without even realizing she was helping. She tried to calm her thoughts as she made herself a cup of warm tea. The steam rose slowly, swirling in the air, almost reminding her of the feeling she had when her fingers touched the piano keys. For the first time in a long while, the memories didn't hurt. Instead, they felt gentle, like someone carefully brushing dust off something precious. She stepped outside her room and walked into the morning air. The streets were alive with their usual sounds, vendors calling out prices, children hurrying to school, bicycles clicking past. Everything felt ordinary, yet she felt different inside, as if a small door had opened in her heart and light was beginning to slip through got as she walked. She thought about the academy's invitation. She didn't want to return to the life she once had, filled with pressure and expectation. But yesterday's experience with the shy student kept replaying in her mind. The way his shoulders relaxed, the small smile that appeared when he finally connected with the music, those moments stayed with her. Maybe she could help others like him. Maybe this time, the piano didn't have to be a burden. She walked without realizing where her feet were taking her. By the time she looked up, she was already standing outside the academy gates. Her heart stirred with surprise. She hadn't planned to come here, yet here she was. She took a slow breath. She could leave. She could turn around and pretend she never came. But something in her urged her forward, a gentle push, a whisper inside her saying, "Just see what happens." The academy grounds were busy. Students moved between buildings, with sheet music tucked under their arms. Some practiced near the courtyard fountain, their notes floating softly through the air. Others leaning against the benches, discussing upcoming performances or difficult passages. None of them noticed her at first. She walked through the main hallway, the faint smell of polished wood and piano strings greeting her. The sound of music poured from several practice rooms, some confident, some shaky, some full of emotion, others full of fear. As she passed one room, a group of students gathered just outside, whispering to each other. They glanced inside, then back at each other in frustration. Curious, she paused. Inside, a young woman sat at the piano, her hands trembling above the keys. She tried to play, but each time she reached a certain part, her fingers froze. The other students looked on helplessly. Before she knew it, she stepped toward the open door. The students recognized her immediately. Their eyes widened, and whispers spread quickly. Some stepped aside respectfully, giving her a clear view of the struggling student. She didn't make a loud entrance. She stood quietly for a moment, observing the young woman's rigid posture and shaking hands. Then she spoke softly, asking if she could come in. The young woman nodded nervously. She walked inside and pulled up a small wooden stool beside the piano. She didn't touch the keys. Instead, she asked the student a simple question. "Why are you scared of this part?" The young woman lowered her head. She explained that this piece was important for her upcoming evaluation, and no matter how much she practiced, she couldn't get through this section without her hands shaking. The teachers had already given her technical advice, but fear still tightened her muscles. The older woman nodded gently. She told her she understood. Then she asked the student to play the piece from the beginning, not to worry about mistakes, not to think about the evaluation, but to play it as though she were telling a story. The young woman hesitated, but she trusted the calm voice guiding her. She began to play. At first, it was stiff, tense, full of hesitation. But the woman sat quietly beside her, listening with patience. When the student reached the difficult section, her hands froze again. The woman placed her own hand gently on the young woman's shoulder, not to guide her fingers, but to steady her breathing. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "Forget the exam. Just feel the moment." The young woman closed her eyes. Her breath slowed. Her fingers relaxed. "Now try again," the woman said, not this time. The notes flowed a little more smoothly. There were mistakes, small stumbles, but she moved through. The part she had feared. When she reached the end, she opened her eyes. Surprised and relieved, the students watching from the doorway clapped quietly. The young woman smiled, though tears formed in her eyes. It was not perfection she felt, but freedom. The woman left the room calmly, not expecting any praise. But the young student rushed after her, thanking her over and over. The woman simply nodded and told her that music was never meant to be a fight. It was meant to be breathed, felt, lived as she walked. Through the hallway again, she noticed the head instructor standing at the far end, watching her with a thoughtful expression. He approached her slowly. "You helped another student," he said softly. She shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't trying to teach. I just didn't want her to fear the piano the way I once did." The instructor smiled gently. "That's exactly why we want your help." The woman didn't respond right away. She looked around at the buzzing academy hall, the students practicing, laughing, struggling, learning. She realized this place wasn't the same as the strict world she once knew. These teachers were different. These students carried different dreams. The head instructor didn't pressure her this time. He simply said, "You can stay for today. If you'd like, watch the classes. Move freely. No expectations." She hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. She spent the rest of the morning drifting between rooms, observing lessons, listening to students practice, and quietly offering advice when asked. She didn't force herself into anything. She didn't pretend to be a teacher. She simply shared small pieces of her experience, and those pieces seemed to help more than she expected. When lunchtime arrived, she stepped outside the academy building and sat on a bench beneath a tall tree. The breeze brushed against her face. Students walked past carrying lunch boxes, chatting with friends, laughing easily. She watched them, feeling something warm spread in her chest, something she had forgotten. Belonging. For years she had lived. Like a shadow, quiet, invisible, distant. She worked just to survive, always keeping her past buried. But here, with these students and teachers, she felt strangely welcomed. She closed her eyes and listened to the faint sound of a piano drifting from a far window. The music wasn't perfect, but it was honest. She thought about the girl she once was, the one who loved the piano before it became a weight on her shoulders. She wondered what that girl would think if she could see her now. Maybe she'd be proud. The afternoon passed with more moments she didn't expect. A student approached her shyly, asking if she could watch him practice. Another asked how to deal with shaky hands during performances. She answered each question gently, never pretending to know everything, simply sharing what life had taught her. The teachers observed from a distance, surprised by how naturally she connected with the students. They whispered among themselves, amazed by the calmness she brought into every room she entered. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting warm golden light across the academy windows, the woman finally felt the weight of the day settle into her body. She stood outside the building, ready to return home. The head instructor walked up to her again. This time, he didn't speak with caution. He spoke with respect. No pressure, he said. But if you ever wish to return tomorrow, or any day, we would be honored. She looked down for a moment, thinking. The truth was, she already knew her answer. She didn't say it out loud yet, but inside, she felt it clearly. She wanted to come back. She felt safe here, useful, whole. After all these years, she had finally found a place where the piano wasn't a burden, it was a bridge. She nodded softly and thanked him, then walked toward the quiet streets leading to her small room. The evening breeze touching her lightly. As she walked, she realized something. The music she thought she had lost was still inside her. It had simply been waiting for the right moment and the right people to return. The sky was a soft gray the next morning, with thin clouds drifting slowly, like they had nowhere urgent to go. The woman woke with a calm she had not felt in years. Her mind didn't race the way it used to. Instead, it held a gentle stillness, as though the world had finally stopped pulling at her from every direction. She sat up and stretched her arms, letting the quiet morning settle inside her. A faint breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the distant sound of someone sweeping the street outside. She prepared a light breakfast, but her thoughts were already drifting toward the academy. She didn't try to fight the feeling this time. There was no pressure, no fear, no residue of the old world she had run from. The academy had become a place where she felt safe, understood, even welcomed. After finishing her tea, she stepped outside. The air was cool, and the street was slowly filling with life. Vendors were setting up their stands. A dog barked in the distance. Neighbors chatted while unlocking their storefronts. Everything felt normal, yet she sensed something new waiting for her. She walked toward the academy at a steady pace. This time, she didn't hesitate at the gate. She didn't wonder if she belonged, or question whether she should turn back. She simply walked in as naturally as if she had done it her whole life. Inside, the grounds were humming with their usual rhythm. Students hurried between buildings, carrying sheet music, backpacks, and instruments. Some practiced in corners, others sat on benches reviewing notes. The familiar sound of piano keys drifted through the corridors like warm air. The moment she entered the main hallway, several students noticed her. Their faces lit up not with curiosity this time, but with real appreciation. A few greeted her, softly, some with shy nods, others with quiet smiles. The woman felt a small flutter in her chest. It was strange, but comforting. She moved through the building with ease, observing classes, listening to teachers, offering a word or two of encouragement when students asked for help. She didn't push herself onto anyone, yet somehow students seemed drawn to her calm presence. Around midday, the head instructor approached her. His expression wasn't stern or formal, it carried a quiet warmth. "If you have time," he said gently, "we would like to show you something." She nodded and followed him down the hallway to a large room she had never entered before. Inside, many of the academy's teachers sat around in a semicircle. At first, she grew nervous, thinking she had walked into an important meeting by mistake. But then the head instructor explained. They had been discussing her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with deep respect. They believed she had something rare, something they could not teach themselves, the ability to connect emotionally with students who were overwhelmed, frightened, or lost. The Academy wanted to offer her an official role. They didn't want her to teach advanced technical skills. They didn't want her to take on heavy responsibilities or long hours. They wanted her to guide students who needed emotional support with their music students who had talent but lacked confidence, who froze during performances, who felt overwhelmed by expectations. They wanted her to become a mentor, a quiet guide, someone who helped shape the heart of the Academy. The woman listened quietly. The offer touched her deeper than she expected. But fear fluttered at the edges of her mind, fear of slipping back into the world she once knew, fear of losing herself again. Sensing her hesitation, the head instructor spoke softly. "This isn't about making you a teacher," he said gently. "It's about allowing you to share what only life could have taught you. You don't have to perform. You don't have to compete. You simply have to be who you are." The woman felt her breath narrow for a moment. She looked around at the faces of the teachers. Every one of them looked sincere, kind, hopeful, respectful. She didn't give an immediate answer. She asked if she could think about it. The instructor agreed without hesitation. She stepped outside into the courtyard, needing space to breathe. The fountain in the center trickled softly, its sound blending with the distant hum of music from the practice rooms. Students walked by, laughing, talking, carrying instruments. She sat on a bench near the fountain and watched the sunlight shimmer across the water. A moment later, she saw the same young student she had helped on the first day. He approached her, slowly, carrying a notebook. "I wanted to thank you again," he said shyly. She smiled gently. "You did the work yourself. I just reminded you to trust the music." He hesitated, then asked if he could play something for her. She nodded. They walked to a small open-air practice area. The student sat at the old upright piano and placed his hands on the keys. When he started to play, she immediately noticed something. His playing was no longer rigid. The melody carried warmth, softness, vulnerability. He wasn't fighting the music anymore. He was sharing it. As she watched him play, a quiet truth settled inside her, what she had once feared about. Music wasn't the music itself. It was the expectations, the pressure, the demands. But here, none of that existed. The Academy didn't want to control her. They wanted her to help. She realized then that she didn't have to return to her old life. She could start a new one. When? The student finished. He looked at her anxiously, searching for her reaction. She smiled softly. "You found your voice," she said. His eyes brightened. After he left, she sat alone for a long moment, letting the realization settle inside her. When she returned to the main building, she found the head instructor in his office. He looked up from his desk when she entered, waiting calmly. This time, she didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," she said. The instructor's expression softened into a grateful smile. "Welcome," he said. "We're honored to have you." The next days were unlike anything she had expected. She didn't become a traditional teacher. She didn't stand at the front of classrooms or assign homework. Instead, she moved through the academy freely, meeting students who needed someone to listen, someone to guide them, someone to remind them that music wasn't meant to be battled. She became known as the quiet mentor. The students trusted her. The teachers respected her. She wasn't part of the faculty in the strict sense, yet she became one of the most important people in the building. Every day, she helped someone new. A boy who froze during auditions. A girl who cried whenever she made a mistake. A student whose hands shook too much to play. Another who felt invisible among more talented classmates. She didn't give long speeches. She didn't overwhelm them with advice. She shared small truths, drawn from life, drawn from pain, drawn from healing. And gradually, Something beautiful happened. The academy's atmosphere changed. Students began to play with more heart. Teachers noticed a shift in confidence and expression. Among their classes, the halls felt warmer, the practice rooms filled with deeper emotion. Somehow, quietly, gently, the woman's presence breathed life into the academy. One evening, after a long day, she sat alone in one of the large rooms with a grand piano at the center. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the floor. She lifted the piano lid. For a moment, she stared at the keys old friends she had once feared. Then, slowly, she placed her hands on them. She didn't play for anyone, not for an audience, not for an exam, not for approval. She played for herself. The melody that flowed was soft, gentle, and full of memories. It was a song she hadn't played in years, a song she once played when she dreamed of happiness. Her eyes filled with quiet tears, not from sadness, but from a sense of coming home. When she finished, she closed the lid softly. For the first time in her life, the piano didn't represent pressure or expectation. It represented freedom. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she realized something deeply true. She hadn't returned to her old life. She had created a new one where her past didn't haunt her, one where music wasn't a burden, one where she wasn't hiding. She had found a place where she truly belonged, and in helping others find their voices, she had finally found her own.